Hi, welcome to Northern Whimsy. This is the grouting portion of the Mosaic mousse kit. We've gone ahead and glued all of our glass pieces onto our kit using the weld bond, and we let it dry at least 12 hours. And now we're going to come back in and do the grouting. In your kit, you're going to receive a cup of powdered grout, and a sponge and a stir stick. You're going to need to provide a container to mix up your grout in, a tub of water of some kind, and a rag for wiping it off at the end, a dry rag. What you're going to do is you're going to take your grout and you're going to pour it into your cup as gently as you can. You don't want to make dust with this. Breathe it in. So you're going to pour it into your cup. Oh, you're going to want to wear some gloves. The gloves are not included in the kit also. But you're going to want to take your little cup and use it to put a little bit of water in. You want to start with a very small amount of water. It really does not take much water to mix up this grout. And you're going to make it about the consistency of peanut butter. So I put about 2 tablespoons of water in. It doesn't have to be exact, but I just start with 2 tablespoons, and I notice that after I stir it for a minute, it's going to be kind of chunky. So I'm going to add a little bit more water. And I'm just adding a teaspoon at a time at this point, because it's always easier to add a little more. You can't take it away once you put it in. So I just put in a teaspoon, and as you can see, it really added a lot of moisture to this. So I'm going to get down to the very bottom of this cup and mix in all of that grout that's in there with my popsicle stick. Getting it mixed in really good. So with this grout, when you're doing your cleanup, you want to make sure that you do not wash grout down your sink or dump the grout water into your sink. It will plug your pipes. So keep that in mind when you're doing your cleanup. Take it outside and dump it, or dump it into the trash. Okay, so getting that mixed all the way to the bottom, making sure it's all mixed. I'm also working on a piece of paper so that my space stays. It's just easier to clean up in the end. Okay, so what I would do if I were working at home or working on my own time, I would just go ahead and let this sit for just a minute. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And what sitting does is just lets all that moisture soak into the grout and be a little more cohesive. But this will be okay for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put some of this grout right in the middle of my mousse. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and use my hands. And I'm going to push it down into all those cracks that we left. We're making it. And I'm going to come around the edge, and I'm pulling it inward so it goes around the cracks, or goes into the cracks on the edges there. I'm just pulling it in there. Filling it all in as I go. And the nice thing about these cutouts is that they are colored on the side, so you don't have to paint these ones, which is really nice. They have a really nice finished edge. These are a company in North Pole that I'm getting these from. It's called Arctic Design Co. You should check them out on Facebook, and they will cut out any designs that you want. So just getting these pressed in. And the grouting takes a little bit of time just to get it all pushed in there. And as you can see, my grout is kind of coming off in blobs, and that's kind of how I want it to be. I don't want it to be too runny where it doesn't stick on there well, kind of runs off. So, and it's always a little sad at this point. You look at it and think it was so beautiful, and then you cover it all up. But we're going to come back to it being beautiful once we wipe it off. So okay, so when I get up to the horns, there's a gap in there that my fingers aren't going to fit into. So I'm going to take some of this grout, and I'm just going to use my popsicle stick to push into those areas. portion of this is really messy, so you want to make sure you're working on a surface or not wearing clothes that you're crazy about. And I'm kind of working on borrowed time here. My little guy just woke up, so hopefully I can finish this piece before he starts making too much racket. So I'm going to use my popsicle stick to press down into those gaps again, filling in all those edges. Okay, once I have those all filled in, I'm just going to come back on this and make sure it's pressed into all the spaces on the body and the legs on top. Go around one more time and double check that it's all filled in. And you'll want to take a little more time on this than I am here. I'm just moving a little quicker for the sake of the video. And get it all filled in, and then I'm going to come back in with my sponge and clean it up. So when I'm using my sponge, I want to be careful that I don't take off too much of the grout. The idea is to leave it filled in those gaps and along the edges. Leave it filled in, but to take out enough that it's nice and smooth. So I'm just rubbing off the excess here. And then I'm gonna get the popsicle stick and clean up that edge in there. These gaps a little bit. So when I go to use my sponge, I want to use the least amount of water possible. So I'm gonna dip my sponge and I'm gonna really wring it out good. So it's wet, but I don't have any excess water in it. Then the fun part is you start wiping away and you see what your final product is going to look like here. Rinse out my sponge, and remember this water, you don't want to dump this water down your drain when you're done. So I noticed that a little bit of glue came up, so I'm just going to try and scrape that off a little bit. Up through. Oh, and he's looking really cute. All that fireweed. This might be one of my favorite kits so far. And I have a few more designs coming. I'm working as fast as I can with kiddo world, and COVID life has changed a little bit. Alright, so I'm not going to wipe that top too much. I'm just going to get it kind of smoothed out, and then I'm going to let it sit, because what I'm going to do is come in with that dry rag, and that's going to polish up the top. But if I keep wiping too much on that top, it's going to take out too much grout, and I want to leave as much as possible in there. Clean up the horns a little. Okay, so I'll keep working on cleaning up the horns and that stuff a little bit, but I'll show you the next step here of what you're gonna do. I'll wipe down the back here first, get it cleaned up. I'm not gonna want to set it back down on this paper at this point because my paper is pretty dirty. I'd get a new piece of paper if I was gonna set it down now. Clean up this bottom. And then I'm gonna take my dry rag. This is just an old t-shirt. And I would let this sit for a few minutes and dry at home. And what you'll see is it'll start to get cloudy, and you can see these edges right here. It's starting to get cloudy, and you'll just take your t-shirt and it'll start to buff up. And I'll work it for a little while. I'll work it for a few minutes, and then I'll let it sit a little bit and dry some more, and then I'll come back in once it's cloudy and buff those glass pieces off, and it's going to clean up really nicely. So you'll start to see, if you let it sit and then come back in, and buff it up. It'll really clean up nice. And after you get it cleaned up pretty good and come back in, you can use some vinegar, some white vinegar on a rag, and it'll really make those glass pieces shine as well. But that step is not, it's not necessary if you don't want to, but that's something you can do if you want to come back in and really polish it up, clean up those pieces. So that's the grouting portion of this. Feel free to send any comments, any suggestions for me, and thanks so much for purchasing your kits. I appreciate it.